In this video, we're going to learn some strategies for multiplying decimals by whole numbers. So you can see these are some of the problems we're going to have to solve on this page. But first, we're going to go through some notes. So I'm going to fast forward real quick so you can see the lesson first, then we'll come back and look at how we do these problems. So here we go. The first one is strategies for multiplying decimals by whole numbers. And the very first strategy that we have is this one, modeling with using hundreds blocks. So we're going to take it step by step. The first step is to take your decimal number, that's going to be your first factor, and we're going to shade. So in this case, we're going to shade 21 hundredths. So there's 10, 20, and one more is 21. Step 2, do this as many times as the second factor. And the second factor is our whole number. So in this case, the whole number that we have is 3. So we're going to do it a total of 3 times. We already have one time in the orange. I'm going to change colors now, and I'm going to count. Now notice I'm going to pick up right where I left off. I had 1 at the top for the 21, the first 21 boxes. But now if I pick up these 9, I have 9, and then another 10, that will give you 19, and then 2 more, that will give you 20, 21. So that's another section of 21 boxes. And I have to do it one more time because the whole number is 3. So I have to have 3 sections of 21 hundredths. So I'm going to switch colors again. I'm going to pick up right where I left off after the green. So I have 8 left in that row, so on that column. So I have 8 and 10 more, that's 18. And then I have another one up here, that's 19, 20, and 21. So now you can see that I have 1, 2, and 3 sections of 21 boxes in each one. So the 3 is taken care of. And you can see that on the very bottom, they are labeled as 21 hundredths in each one, because that represents my first factor. So after I do that, last step is just to count all of your boxes. And if we count those correctly, look at the first column, that's 10 boxes. The next column is also 10, so it's 10, 20. The next one is all shaded. Even though it's different colors, it's all shaded. I do use different colors so you can see the 3 different groups. But the important part is that it's colored in. It doesn't matter what color. So that's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and then we have 3 more, so that was going to give us 63. So the last thing is to write our answers, so 63, and we need to have it in decimal form because each little square represents 100th, since it takes 100 little squares to fill up a whole box, the whole block that we have drawn here. So it's going to be, the decimal has to be in front of the 6, so that the hundredths place, which is the 3, is the last decimal that we use. So in this case, it's going to be using proper decimal form is the correct or the final step here, which means that we have to put that 0 in front, and that would give us our final answer. Okay, so that's how you model by using whole numbers. We're going to follow these steps so that we can solve our problems correctly. But there's also one more thing that I want to tell you. There's 2 more strategies. The first one is this one, modeling, using the model. The next one is, you probably know this one already from elementary school, adding the same number over and over. That's the same thing as multiplying. So in this case, I'm adding 21 hundredths plus 21 hundredths plus 21 hundredths. That was kind of like my problem right here when I added 3 sections of 21 hundredths, and that gave me 63 hundredths. But the last strategy that I'm going to show you in this video is this one, the standard multiplication algorithm. This is the new one for 5th grade. And here are the steps. We're going to take it one step at a time so you can follow me and you don't get lost. Step 1 is quickly and is really easy. Just multiply as if they were whole numbers. So we're going to set it up like you see here on the bottom where step 1 is, and we're going to start multiplying. Just look at that little decimal that's there. Notice that step 1 says multiply as you would with whole numbers. Whole numbers do not have a decimal in front of them, so we're going to pretend that that little decimal there is not there. So I'm going to scratch it off right now so you can kind of forget about it. And we're just going to multiply. 3 is the first number that I have, and I'm going to multiply times the first digit, which is a 1 of my second factor. So 3 times 1 is 3. Now I'm going to take my 3 again, and I'm going to multiply by the second digit in my second factor, which is a 2. So 3 times 2 is 6. So that's why I have 63 as my answer. Done with step 1. Step 2. Count how many digits you have after every decimal point in the problem. So we're just going to count the digits after the decimal point. So if you look here, this is a decimal point that we had scratched off at the beginning. After we multiply, now we come back and we take care of the decimal. This is kind of different than when we add. Notice that on the addition right here on the top, we are lining up the decimal, and notice that whenever we multiply it right here, we don't line up the decimal. The decimal is right here to begin with, and we didn't even line it up, because if you put a decimal in the whole number, the decimal would be right there, and notice that they are not lined up. That's not a perfect straight line going up and down. They're not lined up. So we don't care about lining up the decimal in multiplication, only in addition. Okay? Only in addition and subtraction is whenever we line up the decimal. So now we'll take us back to step 2. After we multiply with whole numbers, go back and count how many places, how many digits we have behind the decimal or after the decimal. So you can see we have 2 places. And this is where I circle this number, because I like to call it a different thing other than just count the places. I like to make it simple. I like to have it a visual. I always like to have a visual to remember my steps. And this time I'm going to call this visual the bubble strategy. So it's kind of like I'm drawing bubbles. I'm going to draw a bubble for the first factor, which we already have it. It's a 2. There's a bubble with a 2 inside of it. But the first digit that we multiplied was a 3. So I'm also going to give it a bubble. And because it's a whole number, there is no digits behind the decimal. Again, I can put a decimal right here because it's a whole number. And you can see there's nothing here, there's nothing there. So the number that should go inside that bubble should be a 0. And finally, the last answer, the last number, also gets a bubble. That's going to be my product, the answer to my multiplication. So the product also gets a bubble. And this one we don't count anything. We actually, because it's the answer, what we want to do is we want to add the 2 bubbles together. So whenever you like blow bubbles, like regular bubbles with soap water, if you put 2 bubbles together, they make one big bubble, right? So that's kind of what's happening here. So 2 and 0, when you put them together, that makes 2. 2 plus nothing is 2. So that's going to take us to step number 3. In step number 3, it says that we have to move the decimal point to the left as many places as there are digits behind the decimal. Well, that can be a little confusing. So my way of saying it is just look at your last bubble, the bubble for the product. That's a 2. So that means that you have to move the decimal 2 times. Starting at the very end, because it's a whole number right now, it's 63. That was our answer on step 1. We put a decimal there behind the 3, and then all we have to do is move it 1 time, move it 2 times to the left. And that means the decimal ends up right there, right in front of the 6. So we're done with step 3, and to find or to write the final answer, all we have to do is make sure that whenever we have the decimal in front of the 6, we use proper form by putting a 0 in front for the whole number place. If there is no whole number, we always put a 0 there. That's just good mathematical form. Okay? So that's it. So we're going to model, and then we're going to use the standard algorithm to check our problems. So I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning so you can see how we do those problems. Number 1, the problem that we have to start with here, it's going to be 1800s times 4. So I am going to fill in 1800s, that's one section, and then I'm going to do it again. So that's 12, 10, and 6 more. That gives me 10. 2 and 10 is 12. So I count 6 more. That gives me 18. So that's going to give me another section. And I do it again. I have 1800s more. And then finally, I'm going to put different colors so you can see them here. Finally, I'm going to shade in the last one. So that one I'm going to put it in blue. So you can see my 4 different sections of 1800s. And I have outlined them for you so you can see them clearly, and all I have to do is count them. So if I count them correctly, I end up with 72. There's 72 boxes there. But don't remember, this is not decimal proper form yet. Right now it's just 72 boxes, but each box represents 1/100th of the whole entire box, of the whole entire whole. So that means that I have to put the decimal place in front of the 7, because that gives it the place value that it deserves, 72/100ths. There's 72 boxes. And then I put a 0 in front of the decimal so that I can have proper math form. And now I'm going to check my answer with the standard algorithm, following those 3 steps with the bubble strategy. So I'm going to set it up like this. Remember that we forget about the decimal, okay? So pretend the decimal is not even there. We're going to go ahead and multiply. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and delete it so that you can remember, we don't worry about the decimal. So the decimal is not even there. All right. So we're going to start multiplying the 2. Let me go back one step. We're going to start multiplying, but I'm going to multiply the 4 times the 8 first. And 4 times 8 is 32. So I'll put the 2 there, and then I'll carry my 3. Now I'm going to multiply the next number, which is going to be 4 times 1. And 4 times 1 gives me 4. But if I add the 3 that I carried on the top, now that gives me 7. So my answer is 72. Well, now I can go back and put my decimal, because now I can take care of my decimal place after I'm finished multiplying my numbers as if they were just whole numbers. Remember, that was step 1. So now I'm going to put my bubbles, 3 bubbles, 1 for each factor, the number that's been multiplied, and 1 for the product, which is the final answer. If I count the numbers in my first number that I have, my first factor, the numbers behind the decimal, the digits behind the decimal, I have 2 digits. So inside the first bubble, I'm going to put a 2 there. In the second factor, it's a whole number, so there's nothing behind the decimal. So I'm going to put a 0. And to find my final bubble, the product, I'm just going to add the 2 and the 0, and that gives me 2. So for my final answer, I now need to put my decimal at the very beginning, like behind the 2, because right now it's a whole number, and then I move it 2 times to the left. And that's where my decimal point ends up. So the final answer is 72/100ths with a 0 in the whole numbers place, in the ones place, because we don't have anything in the whole as a whole. We just have the decimal part. So the same steps are going to be following number 2 and number 3. So I'm going to go a little faster so you can check your work. Hopefully you're not doing this with me. Hopefully you already did it, and you can go ahead and just check your answers. But if not, then go ahead and pause it, take your time and do it, and then you can have notes and you can have plenty of practice to master this skill. So now I know that my answer matches my model because I checked it with my standard algorithm. So number 2, I have 23/100ths times 3, which means I need to have 3 sections of 23/100ths. So that's 1, there's 2 there, and there's 3 there. Notice that you don't have to change colors. You can just do the shading with your pencil or with the same color highlighter. And I do like to box in each section so I can make sure I have 3 sections. So now I count all the boxes and I end up with 69 boxes, little bitty squares. But again, this is not 69 wholes, it's 69/100ths. So using proper math form, I put the 0 and the decimal where it belongs. Standard algorithm, 23/100ths times 3. I'm going to set it up like this. Forget about lining up the decimal for multiplication. Remember, we don't have to line it up. Only when we add or subtract is when we line up the decimals. Right now, we don't care about it. We use our bubble strategy for multiplication. So we're going to multiply 3 times 3 is 9, and 3 times 2 is 6. Done. Now, bubbles. And fill in the bubbles. The first factor has 2 digits, the number 2 and the number 3. That's 2 numbers, 2 digits behind the decimal. So inside my first bubble, I put a 2. The second bubble is going to have 0 because it's just a whole number. There is no digits behind the decimal. And if I add 2 plus 0, I get 2. So that means that I have to move my decimal in my answer 2 times to the left. So if I do that, I'm going to end up with my decimal in front of the 6. And if I write it with correct math form, I put a 0 in the ones place, and that matches my answer for my model. Number 3, going a little faster, we have 46/100ths, and we have 5 sections. We need 5 sections of 46/100ths. So 1, 2, 3, 4, that gives me 40. 6 more, that's 46 hundredths. And then I go ahead and do the next one. 46 hundredths, 46 hundredths, 46 hundredths, and 46 hundredths. Notice that I pick up right where I left off from the last section that I shaded. And it's okay if you do what I did and it jumps over to the next model of a whole, so that you can fill in the full 46 hundredths in each section. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to count them. And if I count all of those, I end up with 2 as my whole number, because you can see, let's see, there's one hole right there, and there's another hole that's completely full. So that's my 2 holes, 1, 2, 2 holes, and then I have 30 little squares. So that's going to give me my 2 as my whole number, and 30 little squares is the same thing as 3/10, because you have 3 of those strips, 3 of those lines, columns. That's the word I was looking for. 3 columns going down. So it's the same thing. 2 and 3/10 is the same thing as 2 and 30 hundredths. You can put it either way. Standard algorithm, set up my numbers and multiply as if they were whole numbers. Forget about lining up the decimal. We don't do that for multiplication. 5 times 6 is 30. There's my 0, carry the 3. 5 times 4 is 20. Plus 3 is 23. And now I do my bubbles. My first bubble is going to have a number 2 inside of it, because there's 2 digits behind the decimal. My second bubble has a 0. 2 plus 0 is 2, which means I move the decimal 2 times to the left. And that means my decimal ends up between the 2 and the 3. So my final answer is going to be 2 and 30 hundredths, or 2 and 3/10 would be the same value. So that's why I put the little 0 with a little dash line there, because you can have it or you cannot have it. It's the same value. Alright, so now that's where we ended up with the decimals there. Those are the notes that we already took. And now we have the number 4 and number 5. So number 4, you have the same situation where you have 72 hundredths, and you need 3 of those sections. So that's my first section. Here's my second section of 72 hundredths. And finally, here's my last section of 72 hundredths. So I have 3 sections. You can tell that I have 2 holes. So my first thing is I'm going to put 2 in the hole as a whole number. My decimal is next after the whole number. And after the 2 holes, I have a row, a column of 10, and then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more. So that gives me 16 little boxes, which is 16 hundredths. And in this time, I didn't ask you to do the standard algorithm, but you can always check it that way. So you can practice the standard algorithm with the bubbles. But that's your answer. Now if we do number 5, says Carly has 6 apples, each weighing 38 hundredths of a pound. How much do all of her apples weigh together? So together means we have to add them all up together. So in other words, we're going to use the model for repeated addition. In this case, we have 6 apples, and each apple weighs 38 hundredths of a pound. So that means that we're going to shade in 38 little squares, and that's 1 apple right there. That is the model for how much 1 apple weighs. And now have the same thing for the next apple. I have 3 apples so far, 4 apples, 5 apples, and finally 6 apples. You can probably tell that I have 2 complete holes colored in, which means that my answer is going to start with the hole number 2, and that's my decimal point. Then I have 2 columns, and then I have a little piece of the other one, which is 8 little hundredths in there. So it's going to be 28 hundredths. And that's it. That's how you multiply decimals by whole numbers using the shading, the 100 squares, and the base 10 blocks, and the standard algorithm.